Good day, everyone. I am Christine, the moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone to today's webinar, that is, what managers need to know when preparing for and conducting effective performance evaluations. I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Diane L.D. Diane L.D., President and founder of Advantage HR Consulting, LLC, is a senior human resources professional with over 30 years of experience in the HR arena. Diane holds a master's certificate in human resources from Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations and has attended SPHR, DEI, CPC, and SHRM, SCB certifications. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you very much, Christine. And I want to welcome and thank our participants for joining us today. So let's start out by talking about what is performance management and why is performance management so critical. So how do we go about preparing for a performance evaluation discussion? What about tracking the employee's achievements and areas for improvement? Guidelines for objectivity. When we talk about scheduling thoughtfully, be mindful of the timing of these discussions. Set the right tone. Be balanced and objective. Set the right tone. This is where you will encourage dialogue. Some additional prep tips for the discussion. I also want to address the role that emotional intelligence, EI, has with performance evaluations. We also need to be aware of our biases when we're talking about performance improvement and or evaluations. And another important aspect is incident recording throughout that performance period. When you're tracking, you need to be consistent. So you would want to consider the following. Addressing employee underperformance requires a structured, empathetic, and proactive approach. So I've listed some strategies here to help manage and improve underperformance effectively. Diagnosing the root causes of the issues. Establish clear expectations and goals. Offer the employee targeted support. Provide clear and constructive feedback. Be sure to monitor the employee's progress on a regular basis. Foster a sense of accountability. Maintain empathy and open communication. Reinforce positive behaviors you're seeing. Be prepared for escalation of the issues. Another very important area that gets overlooked, unfortunately, is how we can integrate performance management and our HR group. So I've outlined here the 5 key areas that we should be integrating with HR. What about compensation and rewards integration? Workforce planning. So how do we go about integrating? So let's talk about how we can effectively manage our employees' performance. Use a structured evaluation process. Calibrate ratings. Use technology wisely. Key performance indicators. So what are some of the key characteristics of KPIs? So I also want to talk about effective feedback. So here are some tips for delivering effective feedback. So let's look at the different types of feedback. Feedback by approach. Formal feedback is structured, less effective or risky feedback. The difference between feed forward and traditional feedback. With respect to 360-degree feedback versus traditional. Management by objectives, known as MBO. I think we're pretty much all familiar with performance appraisals typically conducted. Progressive discipline. It's disciplinary measures that range from mild to severe, just depending upon the nature and the frequency of the issue. Managers to be able to intervene and correct employee behavior at the very first sign of trouble. The purpose is to give employees clear expectations and opportunities to improve. So the key principles. Consistency. So what are the 4 steps involved with progressive discipline. The step 1 is coaching. Step 2 is where you give the employee a verbal warning. Step 3 is when you issue a written warning. Step 4 is termination. There are some times when you might need to skip some of those steps in the progressive discipline, some legal considerations with progressive discipline. I also would like to cover performance improvement plans. An employee consistently fails to meet job expectations. Key elements of a PIP: support and resources. Steps to implementing the PIP: you need to be prepared. You would monitor the situation, some best practices, some legal consideration with respect to PIPs, some common PIP mistakes that you want to avoid at all costs. So PIP outcomes. I also want to touch upon the importance of documentation throughout an evaluation process. So the question becomes, why do we need to document? Why should we document? So what do we mean when we talk about evidence of performance? How can you tell if your documentation is effective? Before documenting, consider the following. When you're documenting, describe the circumstances that made the disciplinary action necessary. When you're putting your documentation together, be professional and courteous. Be aware of these documentation errors and pitfalls. Don't go strictly by memory. This speaks to documenting in a timely manner. Here are some feedback examples. Taking corrective action. So what you need to do before terminating is assess the risks of taking termination action versus the risks of not taking termination action. How do you go about doing that? Well, you need to consider the following prior to terminating an individual. You can minimize the likelihood of a lawsuit. Ensure that the termination does not come as a surprise to the employee. When you're ready to have that termination discussion with the employee. So in conclusion, at its core, performance management is about clarity, communication, and consistency. Thank you, Christine. Again, I want to thank our participants for joining us today. I hope you found the presentation to be informative and helpful.
Thank you, Diane. That concludes the session for today. Thank you, everyone, for participating. You may all disconnect now and have a great day ahead.
Thank you, Christine.